Hey friends, welcome back to another video. My name's Emma Lefebvre, and today I'm going to be sharing a tip with you that will change everything with your loose watercolor florals. So let's jump right in and get started. Okay friends, so today we are going to be talking about the perfect amount of white space you need for your loose florals. So if you're not sure exactly what I'm talking about, when I'm referring to white space, I mean these little bits of white in between petals. Now, if you leave too much white space, you could risk your flowers looking very kind of like fallen apart, just too spaced out. But also, if you don't leave enough white space, you could risk your flowers looking like blobs on a page. So how much white space do you actually need? So today I'm going to give you some tips. First, I'm going to show you the two things not to do. So let's start with a rose, for instance. So I'm just going to grab some red here, and I'm going to show you one of the most common ways that beginners do a rose. So I teach you to do these little kind of C curves, right? But I notice that the curves are a little too far apart. And when they do the larger C curves, we get these really kind of arched petals, and you have all of this white space in between. It looks like the petals are not attached and they're kind of falling apart, right? So this is what you don't want to do. The other thing that I see, the opposite of the spectrum, is where there's not enough white space and then your flowers end up looking like a single blob and you can barely see the separation between the petals. You need to find the sweet spot of having that tiniest little bit of white space to separate those petals, but also have it looking like it's nice and tightly together. Because with flowers, you want those petals to look like they're kind of layering over top, but leaving that little bit of white space is going to allow for some highlights. So you don't want to do this. So let's try to find the perfect amount of white space. So when doing a rose, I do these little small C curves, right? And you want to leave like the tiniest little bit, okay? You want your petals touching. You want each stroke to touch another stroke somewhere, okay? You don't want to have them, just floating here by themselves where they're not touching another petal. You want them touching another petal somewhere, but you want to leave enough white space. So then with my rose, I tend to do these curves. First of all, we don't want them very arched like this. We want them a little bit more flat, kind of like this, okay? Like a wave, a flattened wave. So we're going to do one C curve here, and notice that this petal is touching one of those smaller center C curves there and there. We're going to do another one here. Usually I have the center, like I said, touching one of the center little C curves, and then here, okay? And they're also touching one of the other petals at the end. All right, so we have all this tiny little bit of white space here, but each stroke is touching another stroke somewhere. Okay, then I like to go and make them a little bit bigger. So I tend to put my stroke right over top of where those two inner petals meet. It gets thicker at the center, and again, it's touching one of those previous petals. Again and again. And you should have these little spaces of white space. Now, if you find that maybe there's a little bit too much white space where it looks a little bit weird, you could always just do like a little line stroke in there, not completely covering it up, but just breaking it up a little. And then I just like to make them thicker as we go out. Again, leaving that little bit of white space so we have separation. All right? Like so. And then with my roses, I tend to go back in and just add a little bit more darkness to the center, just for a little bit of shadow. Okay? Now, with other flowers too, like say an anemone, you're going to have something similar. Okay? So I'm just going to grab some pink here. I like to do my petals kind of rounded but a little bit jagged at the end. And then the next petal, you don't want to do it so close where they're like sitting on top of each other, okay? And then there's like no space here. They're just too close together. Although you can fix it a little bit with some more shading and stuff. You want them to be close and touching in an area, but I like to try and leave a little bit of white space at the bottom and then at the top. So they're kind of just touching at the belly of the petal. And do another one. Again, touching at the belly. Another one. Oops. And then another one here. So look at the white space that I'm using. Okay. Like I said, we're leaving a little bit at the center and at the tips. And then I do this kind of rounded petal down here just to give it a little bit of perspective. Okay. So there's that one. And then you would do the center. I usually do it when it's dry. So now that's not the only place that you want to make sure that you're leaving enough white space. You also want to take this into consideration with your leaves. So just doing leaves separately, not even adding them to a flower. Let's take some green. I have this like bright green over here. Okay, and I'm just going to show you what not to do. When doing leaves, you don't want to leave too much white space in between leaves. So I see this a lot. First, I see like really kind of thick stems. Then you have your leaf. And then I find people putting their next one just like on a right angle, like the letter L. Okay. Having the leaves so far apart with this much white space in between and on a right angle makes them look really structured and kind of amateur. So what I want you to think of is more of a letter V. So do your stem, but this time instead of doing a straight thick stem, I want you to do a slight curve and make it as thin as you can. Have your leaf at the end, okay? And then instead of coming right out at a right angle, put it nice and close, not too close, but make more of a V shape. See this V shape here? And then have your leaf slightly touching the other one, just at the belly, just a little bit. So you have this little amount of white space in between there, okay? And then what I also like to do is just to change up the color of my green, just to give it a little bit of variation. I'll do another one here. Again, that V shape, slight curve to our stem. Let's make it a little bit darker, the green. Change up the green a little bit, and they just slightly touch like that. And it just looks a little bit more organic. It flows a bit better. It looks a little less structured, which is really nice. Okay, so always having this V shape. That, and it doesn't have to touch another leaf completely. You can have this, but having that V shape is going to close that white space just a little bit so it doesn't look like it's so spread out. Okay, so these are my tips for adding stems of leaves. Now, if we wanted to add our leaves to our flowers, the place where I usually put my leaves is right in between a flower's petals. So I'm just going to grab some green here. With our rose, it would be in between any of these kind of curves. Now, I usually tend to do it when it's still wet so I can get a bit of a color bleed, but you don't need to. But what I want you to think about, I'm going to do what not to do over here and what to do over here. I don't want you to, again, straight, thick stem, okay, where the leaf is going to be coming out far away from the flower. It creates too much separation and it just looks a little bit weird. See this? We want our bouquets to be nice and tightly wound together. So what I want you to do is to do your little stem, but you're going to make it, again, nice and a little bit curved, nice and thin, but you're going to curve it just slightly around, instead of sticking straight out, around the petal. Okay, now just because my stem is this big doesn't mean I want to start my leaf all the way over here. I'm going to have my leaf coming right down here. This is more of a guideline. So I'm going to leave a little bit of white space in between the petal and the stem, but I'm going to have it kind of tightly in there. So it's like it's hugging the petal just a bit, but you want to make sure you have this white space. What you don't want to do is where you have it so tight where you don't see any stem and it's just like coming out. Okay, I mean, you can do that, but it just looks like you don't get that separation. That little bit of white space is going to show just the tiniest bit of separation between the petal and the leaf, and it's just gonna make it, it's gonna give it that separation that it needs. So there's one leaf, okay? We have that little bit of a stem that you can see. And then for the next leaf, that would be right next to it. Let me get my darker green. I'm gonna have it going the other way. So again, I'm just doing a guideline here, but I don't want it to start over here. I want it nice and tightly to the petal, but leaving that little bit of white space. Okay, and they're kind of moving around the petal instead of sticking straight out. Now it might look a little weird because you have these two leaves that are just like this, so you could always add a third. This one, I'd add the stem a little bit further up. Again, I don't want it so tightly together that it's gonna be right beside or like touching these leaves where you don't even see that separation, but you want the tiniest bit of white space. It's gonna touch this leaf just a little bit in an area, maybe touch that leaf if you want it to. But this small amount of white space is going to create that separation, but also have that illusion that they're nice and tight together. Okay, and then I usually like to go back in, add a little bit of darkness. Like so, just for a bit of depth. Okay, so same thing with our Cosmo here, or our Cosmo or anemone, whatever this shape is. Okay, again, we don't want this straight, thick leaf stem like that. Looks a little odd, okay? And you can have it, again, coming in between the two petals. I usually would tend to do it more towards the base, but say it's being surrounded, it's in a bouquet. I would, again, have our little stem nice and thin, curve it a little bit, start over here, give it that little leeway of white space, curve it around just a bit. I'd have one over here. Maybe up here. Again, just touching in one little area, but you have that tiny bit of white space. And then I just go back in. Okay, and then the one down here, again, curving around the petal. Little bit of white space at the base, just a little bit. This way, one going this way. Like that, and then maybe one coming up here. You want to see a little bit of that stem. You want to see the little base of that stem, but make sure it's nice and small. Okay, and there you go. So that is the perfect amount of white space you want to leave with your flowers. I'm just going to do the center of this this flower because it just looks odd. Okay. But when you're doing your loose florals, and this is for loose florals, when you don't have a bunch of that shading or anything, this is the kind of vibe that I suggest going for. It just creates this really nice tight bouquet, or just more realistic feel to it rather than this jagged kind of structured look. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below, if that was helpful or not, and happy painting. Thank you guys so much for watching my video. I really hope you liked it and I hope you learned something. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and follow me on Instagram and all my other platforms for tons more content. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.